If we think then very quickly also about Sufi traditions in India, and Sriram spoke a lot about Bhakti traditions, and the Sufis and the Bhaktis, of course, were closely allied and became an early form of sort of syncretic conversation that luckily continues into India today, even though it is probably under danger and threat even as I speak. The Sufis, as many of you know as well, always compose poems that are hard to read, not because they're difficult to understand, they're actually stunningly gorgeous and wonderful and beautiful and moving, but because the addressee of the poem is always at once both God and the beloved. And so it becomes almost impossible to distinguish which poem is addressed to God and which poem is addressed to the beloved. And one of the reasons for that, as the Sufis themselves talk about through their poetry a lot, is because these two are mapped onto each other. So the beloved becomes like the Lord, and the Lord comes to the poet as accessibly as the beloved. And one thing that is very, very necessary for us to note in all Sufi poetry written in the Indian subcontinent is that the addressee of the love poems written by men are always men. Now, some people say this is because the poems were written in Persian. Persian is a non-gendered language, and so the assumption just becomes male, and there's certainly a lot of linguistic truth to that. But equally, if you read poems by people like Bulle Shah or even Amir Khusro to Nizamuddin, they will often mention the name of their beloved, and the name of their beloved is always male. And so Sufi poetry will not give you one body to latch onto, it will give you at least two, but all the bodies it's going to give you, all the ideas it's going to give you are going to be ideas of love between two men. And there is no apology for it, there is no shame around it. This is freely spoken about and amazingly extolled. I mean, the intensity of the love. When Nizamuddin dies in Delhi, Khusro says, I'm not going to tie up my hair because night has descended on the world. And the veil of his hair becomes the darkness that he lives in from now on. And so this sort of deeply moving poetry, which sort of shuttles between the divine and the human, is also a poetry that moves through the body. So yes, the body of the beloved is important and interesting and enticing, but it's also something that moves beyond it to something much more abstract, that you don't necessarily have a body for the divine, except that the body that you can see in front of you. So the body then, in the Indian subcontinent, has been really relegated to second, third or fourth place when it comes to thinking about desire. That desire has always been much more capacious, has been much more exciting, has been much more plural and multivocal than thinking about it in terms of the body alone and across multiple disciplines.
Subscribe to Sarmaya and be a part of the stories and conversations around art, history, and culture.